Welcome back to the Super Good, Super Delicious podcast. My name is Carly and I will be your host as usual. In today's episode, I am going to be talking about a recent recipe that I made and how it was a success or a fail and everything that went into it because it was very, very much an experiment. Okay. So this is actually the second time that I'm filming this now because the mic on the camera, the receiver was not plugged in to the camera. So I filmed for like 35-ish, 40 minutes and there's basically no audio. So that was fun. So I took a little break, we had a little lunch, and I thought, you know what, I have some energy back, okay, to re-record this episode because I know I've been slacking ever since Christmas. I've just not been recording for podcasts, so I would like to continue that so we can have a regular Monday podcast going, okay, again. So let me just break it down for you. I found a recipe online. I can't remember if it was Instagram or if it was just like a suggested recipe on Facebook or something, but essentially it was a bar recipe, like layers, cookie dough, maybe there was marshmallow or something in there. Anyways, it was a layered bar and it just got me thinking that I need to try something like that. And why not use like different ingredients I've never done before. So I don't know what they called it, if they called it a s'mores type of bar. I think it was some interesting name that I've never heard of. And when I tried to Google like a vegan version, I found nothing. So I was like, interesting, maybe I'm just gonna make something up, I guess. I ran into a few speed bumps along the way, okay? So I'm gonna tell you guys what happened. This is the idea: chocolate cookie dough layer, a marshmallow layer in the center, and then another layer of cookie dough on top. That was my base idea going into it. And after thinking about it a little bit, I was like, you know what? I feel like this would be more delicious with like double chocolate chip cookie dough. That's what I went with. And I decided that I might as well just go ahead and use my same chocolate chip cookie dough recipe, but just sub some of the flour out for cocoa powder to make it double chocolate instead of just finding a new recipe. Because I did find a new recipe, but I didn't think it was going to be big enough. So I was like, you know what? My chocolate chip cookie dough recipe makes like 30 cookies. This should be enough. So I went ahead and I started to go through the motions of making cookies, okay? We creamed the butter, we creamed the sugar, we got all our dry ingredients. First problem, okay? My first speed bump that I hit was converting some measurements, converting the measurement of flour to cocoa powder ratio to substitute it. Okay, now in my research, I swear to you, it was saying like 10% or something, and I'm like, okay, hold on. I'm not good at percentages, I'm not good at fractions, I'm not good at math, okay, guys? I immediately saw that's how you're supposed to do it. And also my scale still, it's not working, and I might just have to buy a new one, so I haven't gone out and bought a new food scale. So to get a percentage, an accurate percentage, I would have to weigh my ingredients. Okay. I'm not doing that. We are a estimation girly, okay? I am not really a super fine by the book weighing out my ingredients type of person, and I don't think that many people are, and I'd like to be more relatable in a sense of anyone can do this. You don't need a scale, you don't need to be hyper accurate, you can just go with your gut and it'll still taste good, okay? What I decided to do now, cocoa powder absorbs more, I forget what the right terms are, but it absorbs more liquid than flour. Even gluten-free flour. Gluten-free flour also absorbs more than regular flour. But I didn't know that cocoa powder absorbed actually more. What I decided to do was remove a quarter cup of flour, gluten-free flour, from my ingredients, okay? So I use 2 different kinds of gluten-free flour, and I do 1-to-1 gluten-free flour and an all-purpose gluten-free flour. Usually the majority is the 1-to-1 gluten-free flour, which is a rice-based flour with xanthan gum in it, to provide a gluten-like structure in baking, and then the all-purpose is more chickpea based, so it's a little bit denser and doesn't have anything like xanthan in it. I thought, I still want to stick with my ratios, okay? I still want to do mostly 1-to-1 gluten-free flour and then like a quarter all-purpose gluten-free flour. And then just add in that quarter cup of cocoa powder. So what I ended up doing, let me just give it to you, okay? The original recipe is 1.5 cups of 1-to-1 gluten-free flour and 3/4 of a cup of all-purpose gluten-free flour. So what I decided to do was cut it back and do 1.25 cups of 1-to-1 gluten-free flour. Now I have an extra quarter left, and I took away a quarter from the 3/4 of a cup of all-purpose flour. So I am left with half a cup, so a quarter of that's going to be cocoa powder, so I have a quarter remaining. So I have a quarter remaining there, and I have a quarter remaining that should have been 1-to-1, but obviously my ratio, I needed a little bit more all-purpose. So I ended up doing 1.25 cup 1-to-1 gluten-free flour, half a cup all-purpose gluten-free flour, 1/4 cup cocoa powder, Dutch processed. Okay, higher alkaline, cocoa powder, a little bit richer, darker, delicious. Okay, now I went ahead, I put it all in, and I will be posting this as a short and a reel on Instagram, so you will see this small little video one of these days, probably next week. I mean, whenever this video is posted, I don't know, it might be up prior to this video being posted, I don't know. I did the dry ingredients. I added in my creamed butter sugar mixture, and I mixed it all together, and I was like, yo, this is challenging. Like, it was hard to stir, okay? It was not as fluffy and smooth and nice as my regular chocolate chip cookie dough. So I could really see how it was just like sucking all of the moisture up with the cocoa powder. So I thought that was really interesting. And then it made me question if I should have actually taken away more flour or added more liquid into my ingredients, because it was quite sticky, and normally my cookie dough is more of like a greasy, like you could ball it in your hand, it won't stick to your hands. So I thought that was interesting how that worked. And also, normally my chocolate chip cookie dough recipe has 1.5 cups of sugar split in half, cane sugar and brown sugar. Now I made these cookies a little while ago, and I decided that's too much sugar for just over 2 cups of flour, 1.5 cups of sugar. That's a lot. That's like way too much sugar. So I had actually tried the recipe with cutting it down to 1 cup of sugar, so 1/2 cup cane sugar, 1/2 cup of brown sugar. And the cookies turned out amazing, and they were delicious, and they were still perfectly sweet. I just feel like there was less granules of sugar in the cookies, which is what I was going for because I felt like it was too much sugar. So I followed suit, and I did the same thing. With this cookie dough, I only did 1 cup of sugar, which I think was a good idea. So that lack of sugar should have helped with the moisture absorption and not being too drying. Okay, that didn't happen though. So anyways, it was a little sticky, but it was fine, okay? I could tell it wasn't the same as my regular chocolate chip cookie dough, but it's fine. I thought, you know what? It's good, okay? So I decided to put it in to the fridge and just let it let it sit, let it marinate. You know, you put cookie dough in the fridge all the time. Let it sit in there. It'll be good. And then I'll make my meringue. So I did a vegan meringue. I was going for like a marshmallow fluff meringue kind of thing to go in the middle layer. So in my brownie recipe, I have a meringue, I make meringue. So I thought I'm just gonna use that recipe. I'm gonna take the meringue from there and I'm gonna just put that in the middle. That will be perfect, okay? So I put the cookie dough in the fridge and I thought, let's make up our meringue now. Now, one thing that I came across now, speed bump number 2, okay? In my brownie recipe, all of the sugar for the recipe goes into the meringue, which is like a cup of sugar. So I was like, my cookies already have all the sugar in them. This meringue does not need to be that sweet, okay? So I decided to do a little Googling, all right? So I found a marshmallow fluff and vegan meringue recipe from It Doesn't Taste Like Chicken. In her recipe, she had used 1 cup of chickpea brine and then like 3/4 of a cup of sugar, just cane sugar. So I was like, oh, okay. Obviously there's more ingredients, but I was like, oh, okay. That will be my base of how I should structure my meringue too then. So I had 1/2 cup of aquafaba reduced. And then, so I figured, okay, if I have 1/2 cup of aquafaba reduced, I should probably use under 1/2 cup of sugar. And just cane sugar, no brown sugar. So I just happened to have a 1/3 cup in my hand and I was like, that's probably perfect, honestly. 1/3 cup is less than half. So let's just go with that. So I followed the way that I normally prepare the meringue. So I had it, my aquafaba reduced and chilled. I put it in my mixer with my cream of tartar. And then I whipped it up. And then once it was stiff, peaks, I just added in the sugar like a little bit at a time. And then it was stiff and glossy and perfection. After whatever, 10, the whole process takes like 20 minutes. So that was done. I tasted it and I was like, this is amazing. Because when I taste test the meringue for the brownies, it is like too sweet. Okay, it's delicious, but it's also like my throat hurts. That's how sweet it is. And so when I tasted this, I was like, oh my God, this tastes like marshmallow fluff. Like, this is so good. This is so perfect. It worked out. I can't believe it. The ratio was perfect of doing it that way. I put it to the side and I was like, okay, now let's assemble. I pull out my cookie dough, my double chocolate chip cookie dough, pull it out, and it's very hard. Like, good if you're gonna make cookies, but it was a little bit unpliable. So I wasn't too sure how that was gonna go, spreading it in the pan, in a square pan. I took about half of it and I tried, and it was just sticking to the spatula so bad, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is not gonna work. I was like so scared that this was just gonna fail. So then I remembered in a different kind of cookie recipe, I had used a little bit of water and just put my fingers in the water, and then, you know, you can pat on top of the cookie dough and it will actually keep it from sticking to your fingers. So I was like, okay, let's try it. And actually it worked really amazingly. My only thought was that, like, I'm adding too much water to it and it might mess up the cooking. But like I said, the batter was a little bit dry anyways and sticky, so I think it will be okay adding a little bit of liquid. So I just went and I patted it around and I spread it out as best as I could. And then I was like, okay, this is like, it's getting too much water, so let's leave it. It was pretty much to the edges. It was pretty good. Let's throw in the meringue. So I grabbed my marshmallow fluff. So I grabbed it and I put like a hefty layer, okay, guys? I used like at least half, and like, if you've ever whipped up aquafaba, it gets humongous. Like, it's a lot, okay? So I put like a generous layer in the middle, and then I was like, hold on, if that first cookie dough layer was that hard, what am I supposed to do now? I was like, you know what, let's just use my cookie scoop. We'll scoop it. We'll just ball it all on the top. You know, when cookies cook, they spread out. It should just cover the top. That's not what happened. But it sort of happened at the same time. So I put the balls on the top, and you could still see the meringue a little bit in certain spaces. And I was like, you know what? It's fine. This is how it's gonna be. We're just gonna try it like this. Okay. So now I have my cookie dough layer on the bottom, my generous layer of marshmallow fluff in the middle, and balls of cookie dough all on the top. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I cook this? At what temperature? For how long? Like, meringue, you have to cook it low and slow, okay? For a long time, because it can just become like a meringue cookie and just be dust and totally no liquids in there at all. So I was like, okay, let me see. The meringue is like low heat for a long time, and the cookie dough is like higher heat for a short period of time. I really started to rack my brain because I was like, clearly I can't do a short period of time at a high temperature, or the meringue is probably just going to burn, okay, or turn into literal dust. This was my final roadblock. I did a little bit of thinking. Okay, sometimes you just gotta think it through, okay? So I decided to go along with my brownie recipe that has the meringue in it. I went along with that because I've read that cookies and brownies are practically the same thing. They're just cooked in a different way. And I'm like, okay, I have no fear of the cookies getting overcooked at all. I have fear of the meringue overcooking and the cookies undercooking. So I decided my original brownie recipe with the meringue is cooked at about 325 for 40 minutes. So I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna treat them like they're like a brownie, right? It's a square. It's practically the same thing. So I put the oven to 325 and I was like crossing my fingers like, let's do this, okay? So I put the tray in there and I started my timer for half an hour because I thought, you know what? What if this is not a good idea? So I put a timer for half an hour and I waited. Now, I was checking through the oven door so much because I was so terrified of like everything going wrong, or I was spying on it. And the funny thing is, as it was cooking, it was like the cookie dough was like sinking and the meringue was like rising up. And it was just like rising through the cracks of the cookies. And I was like, what is this? What is going on here? It was rising up like an inch above the cookie dough. And I was like, this is so weird, but I hope it's okay. After 30 minutes, the timer went off. And I was like, this cannot be done like at all. The top layer of cookies kind of looked done, but I was like, I don't know about this, yo. So I pulled it out just to be safe, and I was like jiggling the tray. It was literally jiggling, and I'm like, there's no way these are done like at all. So of course I still grabbed a toothpick and I did a little test with the toothpick. Now, they kind of seemed like they were done, but the problem with cookies is you don't ever test them with a toothpick to see if they're done. You look at the bottom of the cookie and the edges, and they're usually brown, depending on the cookie, usually browned. How am I supposed to see the bottom when it's in a square bag? So that was not an option for me. So how I decided to keep cooking it was, one, it was jiggly, okay? It was jiggling, and that scared me. Two, there was no smell. It didn't smell like anything. It didn't smell like I was baking cookies, nothing. And I was like, you know, that's a really good sign when your baking is done, that it smells delicious. You just know, because you're like, oh, it smells like that loaf of banana bread is done. You just know, okay? If you're a baker, you know. I was like, okay, let's put it back in the oven. Maybe it does need 40 minutes, because, like, I don't know. I was just really questioning everything at this point. So I put it back in the oven, and I was like, well, 5-10 minutes, let's see what happens. And eventually it did start smelling, and I was like, okay, okay. And then for a moment I thought, it smells like burning. Great, are my cookies burning in there on the bottom and not cooking in the middle? Little scary moment, but they were fine. And actually, another moment of fear, the meringue started browning. So my white, crispy looking meringue was browning on the top, which I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know it would do that. I've never done this before, obviously, me and my experiments. So I was really terrified that if I kept cooking this for 10 minutes, like, the meringue was going to just burn the whole top. I did not want to deal with that. I did not want that to happen and ruin. Oh yeah, side note, if y'all are going to be experimenting, make sure you cut the recipe in half and do a little half portion first, because that is how, if you mess up, it's not as sad if you wasted half a batch of something. It's very sad if you waste an entire recipe's worth of something, of ingredients, and like, it doesn't work out. It is sad, okay? So my little tip for you, do a half batch if you're experimenting. Don't be like me. I just trusted the process, okay? Put them back in, 10 minutes later, ish, might have been a few more minutes, okay? Pull them out, less jiggly. And I was like, okay, still nicely browned, nothing worse. I was like, okay. Grab my toothpick, and I'm poking around everywhere, and like I said, the toothpick test does not work on cookies, okay? The inside of cookie dough, when you first pull them out, they're gonna seem undone. You pull that tray out of the oven and you break open that cookie, the inside is not gonna look done. So I had to remind myself of this. Actually, Clay reminded me. You just pulled it out of the oven. It's not gonna look done. But then I'm like, how am I supposed to know if this is done? How am I supposed to know? So I kept poking around. You know what another great way to tell, for example with brownies, is if you can peel off the side of the parchment and it just comes off nicely. It doesn't like stick off. So I thought, let me do that. So I pulled the edge off of the around the one edge, and sure enough, it just came off like that. And I was like, okay, I think this is done. It's been like 40 minutes-ish. Everything is appearing to be cooked. But just to be safe, I decided I'm going to just leave it on top of the stove and let it chill for like a good 10 to 15 minutes, because I do not want to risk cutting into this and it's like really not done on the inside. I will be so sad. 10 to 15 minutes goes by and I'm like, okay, let's get cutting this up. And by the way, like, I was filming this, right? So I was like, hey, let's just cut it up and see what we got going on, because this was either a success or a fail at this point. I just grabbed the parchment edges and just whoop out of the tray and put it onto my table, and it was fine. It was totally fine. I was so scared. I think the marshmallow fluff meringue actually did a really great job of keeping it all stuck together when I did that. Now comes the cutting part. And I was like, well, we're already here, so let's just go for it. So I just did like a big like one slice, and then I cut that slice into 2 pieces because I was not going to cut up the whole bar in case it was messed up, okay? I cut it, I took a corner piece, and I was like, oh my gosh, this worked. It was amazing. The cookie dough was done. It was a little bit cakey, but like fudgy at the same time. Like, it could almost, like, you could break a piece and it would almost fall off. And the funny part, actually, all of the meringue that was rising up actually just rose up from being squished. Inside, it just rose up to like the top layer in between all of the balls, and it just sat on the top. And it also shrunk down. almost flat. It was sticking up a little bit, but it was like shrunk down after I let it sit on for those 10-15 minutes. It just all like kind of, you know how cookies kind of flatten? They're fluffy and then they flatten when you take them out? It did that. Interesting. So when I took the piece, it was mostly the cookie dough, and then the marshmallow fluff was like on the top, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then I was really happy because it actually worked out. Like it tasted great, like tasted so good. It tasted very like double chocolate marshmallow, like s'moresy. The only thing missing would be like graham cracker crumbs. And I was just so stoked that it actually worked. I would say like it might have needed an extra like 5-ish minutes just because the one middle piece was like a little underdone. But after leaving it on the table for several hours, it was actually fine that night. So maybe not, but probably 45 minutes would have been perfect. I was just so shocked. As you'll see, I'll share it, of course, so y'all can see how I made it, visually, see how I made it, and how it turned out, because I'm super stoked on how it turned out. In the future, if I do make something like that again, I think what I'm going to do is make sure my dough, like my cookie dough, is good enough to actually spread on top, and then do the meringue layer in the middle and not to the edges for it to like escape. And then so it's actually sealed in, because I'm really curious to see if I like actually sealed it in, what it would have done. And the thing is, the meringue was so good. Like it was like perfect marshmallow. It was like a nice golden brown, and it was like the perfect sticky, like marshmallowy fluff type of behavior on with the cookies. It was so perfect. And yeah, it was just so good. I love when experiments work out. It's always like makes you feel a little good about yourself, because you just did something that no one else has done. Well, not that I know of anyways. And that is how I made my experiment of cookie dough s'mores bars. That's what I'm gonna call them. And it worked out. So I highly recommend to try different things, try new things. You get good at trying, substituting out things. A couple years later, it's like, oh, I know how to substitute that, no problem. I know that that's not going to work. I know that this is going to work. And eventually, we'll get there. And it'll be amazing. And then you'll be making these wild concoctions of things, of a recipe, and people will be like mind blown because they've never seen something like that before. Like every year for my family's birthdays, Clay's birthday, his sister, I always make some type of new cake that I've never done. I'll make different layers. Like one year I made an ice cream cake from scratch for Simone. One year I made Clay. I got a key lime Daya cheesecake, and then I put a lemon curd layer and a cake layer and frosting. I'm just all about the experiments, y'all. And if you have followed along, you probably know that already. So I just wanted to share that experiment with you all, and I probably might just do this again because I do like my experiments in cooking. It's just so much fun, or baking. It's so much fun. Then maybe you learn something new, or maybe it triggers you to try something new. Try to combine some weird things together. See what happens. It's just fun. And as long as it tastes good at the end of the day, who cares what it looks like? I don't, as long as it tastes good and I didn't waste my ingredients. That's what matters, okay? And that tray was gone by the end of the night, okay? We polished those. They were so good. It was giving. And it was giving like a s'mores brownie. Okay. That will be it for this episode today. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you try to do an experiment like this. And I will see you in the next episode. Bye!